All right, so I'm in the process right now of tuning my rigid portable table saw for square. I'll take you through some of the procedures I go through and some of the remedies I use as well. All right, let's get to it. All right, so my first test for square is to check whether or not my saw blade isn't tilting to the right or tilting to the left. Okay, so how I do this is raise my saw blade as far as it can go and test right in the middle with your square. So hold your square flat on the table saw and guide it towards the blade in between the two teeth. All right, you don't want to hit the teeth. All right, you want to go right in between and to see if you can see any daylight between the saw blade and the square. All right, so this looks pretty good. Let's try the other side. All right, let's do the other side here. So we're just pressing firmly to the base of the table saw, right in the middle, between the teeth, and we'll see whether or not there's any daylight coming from between the saw blade and the square. Okay, that's great. All right, so we've distinguished that this portion right in the middle is pretty straight. Okay, so if you really want to get anal, you can go over here between the teeth, over here. And it's not a bad idea, right? You might have a warped or damaged blade, right? But this particular blade looks pretty good. All right, so now I'll take you through some remedies if this blade wasn't true. All right, so one of the first things you can do is to see whether or not you're on zero, okay? Wow, I'm not on zero, all right? But this doesn't matter because I never go by this in the first place. I usually line up my square to the blade in the first place. But if you wanted this to be on zero, which isn't a bad idea, is there's two screws right over here that lines this gauge to zero. All right, what else? All right, so you'll notice on the table saw plate, there are 4 Allen screws, okay? 2 on each end. Now these adjust the plate, okay? Why is this important? Well, if you have a plate that's not totally aligned, okay, and level with this table saw base, this is what you get. It's a bit of a deviation there. Now, for instance, if you're having a smaller piece of wood and you're dragging it along here, say if you're going along the fence and all of a sudden you All right, once you notice you have this issue, what I do is I take off the plate and inspect all of the screws, clean them off, and also on the bases, right? Because you can adjust this all you want, but if you've got sawdust, that's flexible, right? Because once you put the steel on the sawdust, you're never going to get an accurate reading, right? Because as soon as you put any weight on it, it's going to compress. So make sure everything's clean. You'll also notice there's another screw right here. All right, this is for the outfeed. Okay, so you may have to adjust this as well. Right? Make sure everything's clean. First things first. Put your plate back down. All right, and start adjusting it ever so slowly. Just take your square and see if it's getting better, right? All right, so now that we've determined the saw blade's bevel, we want to see if the saw blade is parallel all the way through with the fence, okay? So we want to make sure that the blade is parallel from this end all the way to this end, okay? So let's take a measurement here. At the innermost portion of the tooth to the fence. All right, so I got, man, is this tough to see. So we got it in 30 seconds here. It's just about an inch. Like it's in between the 32nd and the 64th. All right, so let's go all the way to the other end and test it here. Now you're not going to see this, I'm sure, but oh man, it's pretty close here. All right. Now for general purposes, this is going to be pretty straight. Now if you're going to make a cabinet, this is what I do. For those of you who have some serious OCD issues, you can take a crappy, I don't know, $20 caliper and a cheap table saw and perform this test. But let's give it a shot here, okay? So we'll go from this end. All right. Caliper zeroed. Let's zero just for fun again. And try to level it out as best we can here. And let's try it out here. Okay, I hope you guys can see this here. Man, who knows? It could be a tilt. 1.095. And let's zero it off again. And let's try this end. All the way down. Can you see this even? Hi. Sorry, guys. And it's not zeroed off there. Man, oh man. .097. That's pretty lucky. Well, give or take, whatever the case may be, 0.02 of an inch of a crappy table saw. This isn't going to happen all the time, mind you. So you're probably wondering, why would you even do these tests in the first place? Well, for general purposes, it's not needed. All right. If you're building a deck or some laminate flooring or whatever the case may be, you don't need to do this. Okay. But if you're building a picture frame, let's say, all right. So now you have to cut perfect 45s. All right. Now, if you're building a frame for canvas, let's say, that's 3 feet by 4 feet. This is going to have to be perfect, right? You don't want any deviation. Okay. So now, for instance, you're running this piece of wood, okay, down the saw, and it's crooked this way or crooked this way. How is this going to translate 4 feet down the road? Okay, I'll tell you right now how this translates. All of a sudden, you're just perfect over here, and you're perfect on this end. Then all of a sudden, all the way on this end, you'll be like, whoop, that much out. Or all of a sudden, you're like this. So now you're bending and manipulating this wood to form your crooked square. Okay? That's the importance of making sure that this is as true as possible, right? So now you're probably wondering, how do I get my saw blade totally parallel to the fence? All right, you'll notice that there's 4 more bolts, okay? These bolts secure the housing of the motor of the saw blade, okay? So it controls your left and right movement and a little bit of backward and forward, okay? So it's probably easier if you have somebody to help you out, not a necessity. So you're going to take your miter gauge, assuming that your miter gauge is square. You're going to take your miter gauge, line it up with your saw blade, adjust these screws, okay, until it aligns with your gauge, right? But wait a second, are my gauges square? Are they aligned? Which one's aligned and which one isn't? We'll get to that in a second. All right, so I'm just going to take you through a couple of components of the fence for adjustment. All right. So you'll see there's 4 more bolts. Okay. Now these house the fence for your left and right movement. Okay? Now I'll flip the fence upside down, and you'll notice there's guides, okay? These right along the rail here, okay? You gotta make sure that this rail is clean. All right? You also gotta make sure that these guides are clean. I've had issues with this in the past as well. And these are also adjustable, okay? Now, at the very end, here's the guide again. Same thing goes, making sure it's clean. And you can adjust it. But what are you adjusting this fence to? There's gotta be something true on this saw, automatically. You know, the saw blade's not gonna be true, the miter's not gonna be true, the fence is not gonna be true, but what is on this saw, that's true. All right, these miter slots. That's the best thing that you can go by to measure true on this fence. And this is just another way of checking your work, because where the miter gauge is, there's another slot. Let's get to it. All right, so one thing we can do is take another square and test this miter slot against this edge to see if we got a 90. All right, I'm just trying to focus here. All right, let's have a look here. That looks pretty bang on here. All right, let's check the other side. All right, that looks pretty bang on as well. So I would go by this before anything, right? Because we're testing the edge to see if it's true, or we're testing the slot, because everything is going to be based on this slot. All right, so now that we established that this miter slot is a perfect 90 from what I could tell, I'm going to test this fence, okay? So it's gliding along right now. I'm going to line it up, feel along the edge here. I'm going to lock it down now. This is where the test is, when it locks down, and to see if it locks down evenly and perfectly along this miter slot, and it is. So we know that this fence is good to go. So while we're here, we might as well test the miter slot where the miter gauge goes, on the left-hand side of the saw. So let's see if we got true. It's pretty close. How's it measuring up here? It's hard to see the end there, but yeah, I'm happy with that. And the other side. It's eclipsing pretty good. Not absolutely perfect, but it'll do. So let's test the miter gauge. All right, so now that we've established that the fence is true, we've measured from the blade to the fence, from this point to this point. All right, so that's a loose estimate without being tested, okay? We are fairly satisfied with this being true as well, the miter gauge. Now we're going to test our work to see whether or not this is really true within reason. All right, so we're going to take our gauge, all right, and our square, and it's sort of at 0. Once again, I don't go by these numbers, right? You have to test those numbers every time. So now, we'll go in between the teeth, and line up. Does it go flush from one end to the other at equal times without having to push on it to manipulate your measurement, right? Because I could press on this and see how the saw blade kind of moves. You don't want to do that, right? And it does. It's flush against the blade. Now remember, this is cheap, right? This isn't a $2,000 saw. You know what I mean? I'm just gonna pan to the left here. Right? This gauge, it moves side to side, right? It's not perfect, but for a $400 to $500 saw, this suits me just fine. That makes me happy, all right? So take it or leave it. If you have any more advice for me, give it to me. I'm willing to learn. Thanks a lot. Take care.